Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 2. This is bullshit. What do you mean we're lost? The light in the forest was fading fast, and Trick was close to a boiling point. His irritability centered on the girl with the map, but Glow was just as concerned as he was. "The GPS," she said. "I can't get a signal." Glow sounded rattled, more like the nervous kid they all knew back in Seattle. Not a good sign. "Okay," said Trick, trying to calm things down. "What about your cell?" "I already tried that," answered Glow, as she continued stabbing buttons on the useless navigator. Z? For all the focus his girlfriend had, Trick would have fared better talking to the trees. "Z-Mall!" he called again. "Fuck you!" she exploded. "I knew I shouldn't have come here. I told you this was all bullshit." "You're bullshit," he raged, getting in her face. "If you stop thinking with your fucking pussy for 1 second, you might not be such a fucktard." "Yeah?" She reached inside her jacket pocket. "Well, you can just forget about fucking and pussy." She took out her phone and jiggled it in front of him. "Oh, look, no fucking signal," she said. "No fucking signal," she repeated herself, shouting. Glow couldn't understand what had gone wrong. She'd planned it so that, even at their lame-ass pace, they should have reached Camp Crystal Lake by now. Yet somehow, they drifted. They drifted off course. Sure, she'd been distracted by the voice she'd imagined hearing, but not enough to go making stupid errors. Now, without the GPS, the map was useless, and without the map, Glow didn't even want to consider that possibility. They were carrying enough food and water for only 2 days. Their whole plan had been about getting into the camp, staying the night, and then getting straight back out again. Anything else, and they were in deep trouble, survival course or not. Total nightfall was still over an hour away, but Glow decided to try her flashlight. She didn't know why, because the problem with the GPS was signal, not power, but she tried it all the same. Oh, who was she fooling? She knew exactly why she turned on the harsh white beam. She was checking to see that some malevolent force wasn't screwing with their equipment, which could only mean that Glow was losing it. "Hey," called Trick, "batteries?" Funny, Glow noticed, how the boy could break off from his argument with Z-Mall to bitch about energy conservation. She turned off the lamp, put it away, and tried again with the navigator. "Over here!" It was that voice again, the one she'd heard earlier. Glow glanced over at her friends. They were still arguing furiously, just like they always did before a fuck. "This way," said the voice. Glow slapped her ears, shook her head. She turned to look every which way, trying to see who was calling her, but all she saw was the forest. The air was still, there was no breeze, nothing moved. Was she going mad? "Over here!" "Shut up!" she cried, dropping the GPS to the ground. "Why don't you butt out?" spat Z-Mall, thinking it was aimed at her and Trick's bickering. "Don't talk to her like that," shouted Trick. "We can't do any of this without the glowster." "Well, for your information, dickweed, Mrs. fucking Inch High just got us all lost in the middle of fucking nowhere." The two of them started fighting again. Their yelling dissolved in Glow's mind as she concentrated on listening out for more hallucinations. Maybe that was it. Maybe Rickster the Trickster had spiked her water bottle. Whatever the cause, Glow didn't have to wait long before hearing the voice again. "Come this way, dear." The voice wasn't like anyone she knew, and there was something about it that was persuasive, reassuring, and compelling. Glow left the GPS lying in the dirt and calmly walked away. She'd gone 20 paces before the others even noticed she'd moved. "Hey!" Trick hollered. "Wait up, Glow!" But the girl would not stop. "Now look what you've done," said the boy, turning on Z-Mall. "Your cock-sucking mouth wins again. If we don't stop Glow, if you don't apologize to her, we're fucked." Suddenly, unexpectedly, Z-Mall began to cry. "Oh, Trick, you know I only want to be with you. I don't understand all this Crystal Jason stuff." "Shit," the boy sighed. What should he do? Stay there and comfort his girl, or go after the only one among them who had any idea how the hell to get back to the road? "Glow!" he shouted, setting out after the receding figure. "Wait up!" But Glow wasn't stopping for anyone. Not Trick, not Z-Mall, no one. because the voice was still calling to her, leading her on. Only now it was calling her by name. This way, Gloria. This way. And suddenly Gloria Sawicki knew where she must go. Through inexplicable means, this place, this whole forest, had become intimately familiar to her. She no longer needed any map or bullshit gadgets to reach her destination. The girl walked on in silence. Francis and Enoch were bushed. The Grissom boys had just spent a big bunch of minutes digging that huge son of a bitch out of the dirt, and all they'd had to work with was their picky little killing knives. Now Enoch had such a sweat on that his butt reeked of ass-crack vinegar. "He's in pretty good shape," he said, mopping his brow with his shirt sleeve. "Considering he's a goner," agreed Francis, eyeing the petrified corpse. "Don't think I've never seen anything so big." The two of them were sitting on the trunk of a tree that had fallen with the landslide into the crater, and were taking a short break from their labors. Jason was still standing in the near vertical mud face. Most of the earth around him had been chiseled away as if Francis and Enoch had been working on a sculpture, but some of the soil clung to his back, keeping him upright. Strangely, Jason's arms remained outstretched, even though there was no longer any dirt to support them. "You knowin' what I think he is?" said Enoch thoughtfully. "Don't be a streak of piss," whined Francis. "It's Patton who he is. It's that nut Four-Trees." "Sure is," nodded Enoch appreciatively. "Jason fucking Four-Trees. All these years I ain't never seen him. Must have taken the heat for a dozen of ours." By ours, Enoch referred to those victims he and his brother truly deserved credit for. Tourists and woodsmen who, over the years, found themselves in the blood-stained grip of these twisted hill folk. The Grissoms knew for certain that at least 3 of their victims had been attributed to Jason by the authorities. Well, after all, there couldn't be more than one psycho roaming the woods of Crystal Lake, could there? Through the falling twilight, Enoch could see Jason was wearing some kind of jacket made from sackcloth, along with a pair of heavy work pants, a dark shirt, and black leather gloves. Everything was torn and beaten. The whole cheap jack ensemble mottled with a layer of baked mud. And then there was the hockey mask. That ugly piece of plastic had some real bad shit. It was scratched, some pieces had broken off, there were cracks, a couple of bullet holes. How many beatings had this big boy taken? Enoch got up off the log to take a closer look. The mask was decorated with 3 red triangles, one between the eyes, pointing down to the nose, and the others one apiece on each cheek. And the whole plastic dish was pocked with air holes. Enoch stood up on his tiptoes and tried to see inside. "What you doing?" called his brother. "Gonna see what'n he looks like." Enoch raised his hands to lift the mask off Jason's face. "Don't you fucking touch that thing," warned Francis, stepping forward to stop his older brother from going any further. "Why in the fuck not?" moaned Enoch, his fingers hovering over the straps, fastening the hard white oval shape to Jason's head. "Look at him," continued Enoch. "Look at his fucking skin. He's black and wrinkled as a fucking skunk turd. He ain't going to complain none. He's fucking dead. Deceased." But Francis took hold of his brother's arms and pulled them away. "I don't care if he's deceased, delicious, or de-fucking lovely, man tits. You leave that face guard where it is until we get that fucker home. Ma and Pa want to see we take it off. This mad dog's their fucking hero." "They weren't so fond when he killed the Hubbards," Enoch protested. "The Hubbards were our friends." "Man tits, you unholy streak of ignorant piss. The Hubbards was one of them copycat murders. Now stuff a cock in your trap and help me get this fucker down. I don't want to be here all fucking night." Enoch thought about smashing his brother in the mouth, but decided to let that one go. Time was getting on, and lugging the big bastard home wasn't going to be easy. So instead of jawing the brawny redneck, he decided to clamp his strong, hairy hands around Jason's wrist and pulled. "Harder, you faggot!" barked Francis. "He ain't even moving." But struggle as he might, Enoch could not separate Jason from the restraining sheet of filth that clung on to him. "Grab the fucker's legs!" he panted. He took hold of and stood back and watched. "I ain't taking your orders." Enough was enough. Enoch decided just to grab his puny brother by the scruff of the neck and shove his maggoty little face all the way down into Jason's crotch. All right, I'll do most of it," coughed Francis, almost choking on the stink of dead man's balls. A few moments later, the two of them were working as a team. Francis grabbed Jason's legs, while his much stronger brother took hold of the masked maniac's shoulders. Then together they pulled until slowly, inch by resentful inch, the body of Jason started to come loose. Corpse skin grated on dirt, a sound broken with deadly intent. A wiser man than Grissom boys would have left Jason just where he was. An even wiser man would have filled in the rest of the hole and buried the killing machine forever. But no, like so many idiots before them, Francis and Enoch Grissom had a better idea. When the last claw of soil finally released its grip, the lifeless body of Jason Voorhees toppled forward and crashed to the ground. The two brothers jumped out of the way. If they hadn't, Jason would have crushed them. "He ain't going to fit in any damn sack," Francis observed. It was only now that Enoch remembered the sacks full of fresh meat they'd left up by the oak. They'd have to go back and fetch them, but first, "You grab his legs and I'll take in his arms." Francis was on the verge of saying that he wanted the arms, and that Enoch should take the legs, when he saw the murderous look on his brother's face, daring him to open his mouth. So Grissom Jr. kept his thoughts to himself and wrapped his arms around Jason's ankles. "You ready?" asked Enoch. His brother cleared his throat and spat a greenie in confirmation. "Okay, then," Enoch counted very slowly. 1, 2, 3. They heaved the unmoving hulk up off the ground, almost giving themselves a hernia. "Jesus H!" groaned Francis. "This boy's got bigger man tits than you!" Francis waited for the blow to land on the back of his head. The punch never came, but his brother had just taken to wondering how the heck they were going to haul the hockey-masked mother frigger out up the deep side of the basin. There was only one thing for it: start climbing. Bill Irwin flicked the headlamps up to high beam and lit himself a cigarette. At long last, the trees were starting to make way for open fields. But the sun was almost completely gone now, making the lamps a necessity. He'd passed through the small town of Crystal Lake a few hours ago. If you didn't know anything about the history of the place, it seemed just like any other rural one street. It had a couple of stores, a diner, a white clapboard church, a sheriff's office, and some historic houses built in the colonial style. But Bill wasn't much on architecture, so he just followed the road straight through town and out the other side, where a neon sign had diverted him with the irresistible promise of burgers and fries. Inside the diner, he'd found he was the only customer. The waitress wasn't much on talk either. 2 pots of coffee later, and he was back on the road, still just inside the easternmost limit of Wessex County. Suddenly, he was thinking about the kids again. In fact, he hadn't stopped thinking about them since he'd left them behind at the crossroads. "Slappy," he chuckled. For all their BS, he hoped nothing bad happened to them, and he now regretted mouthing off at the boy. After all, what was the point of picking up hitchers if they didn't add a hint of uncertainty to life? Bill sucked on the cigarette and blew the rich smoke out through his nose. Everyone said it was a bad habit. His pop had even died of throat cancer. But then who the hell lives forever anyways? And if you took a wider view of things, who the hell wanted to live forever? Turn on the news and you've got the Middle East, terrorism, people losing their jobs, crime getting out of hand, corruption, the environment's a mess, the economy's fucked. Suddenly, Irwin was in the mood for some country. He had a CD already in the player. All he had to do was, what the? Bill noticed a short convoy of vehicles coming toward him on the other side of the road. The first 2 trucks were motorhomes, roomy but shabby with overuse. The third truck was a fully loaded pickup. So far, so ordinary. But the fourth vehicle was a semi almost as long as Bill's, and both sides of the trailer were covered by the same massive piece of airbrush art. A montage of comic book monsters, Dracula, the werewolf, Jack the Ripper, all striking scary poses beneath a blood-red banner that read, Dr. Geistman's Carnival of Terror. It was this last truck that made Irwin pause. He couldn't believe it. A sideshow of horror going to Crystal Lake. Bill's shoulders twitched, then his chest, then his stomach. Then suddenly his entire body convulsed with laughter. Tears rolled down his cheeks. His sides were aching, but he just couldn't stop. A carnival of terror going to Crystal Lake. You couldn't make up that kind of crazy shit. I know where I'm going, said Glow. She shook off Trick's hand and tried to get by him. Well, I'm glad that's your delusion, replied the boy, holding on to her again, because from the outside your eggs look completely fucking scrambled. His sudden burst of shouting caught Glow off guard, and she shook her head as if coming out of a daze. Zemal just stood and watched. It made her horny to see her man treat other girls like shit. Kudos to the captain, she said, giving Track her best screw-me eyes. Unfortunately, now was neither the time nor the place. What's happening, Glow? I don't know, she stammered. I'm sorry, but I know where we are. Oh, that's bullshit. Trick was losing it. And where the fuck's the GPS? Glow ignored the question and pointed at a beach some way ahead of them. Just through there, past the tree, she said hurriedly. There's a footpath a few yards on, and you reach a pile of stones where the path takes a fork. Why are you doing this? Trick was doing his damnedest not to blow his stack. Just tell me where the fucking navigator is. Her chin fell to her breast. I don't have it. What? Trick threw his hands in the air. Tell me I'm not hearing this. I'm sorry. I dropped it. Well, where? Fuck, Glow, I thought you were the brainiac. You were supposed to get us to Camp Crystal Lake, and now we're body count 1, 2, and fucking 3. I'm sorry, she pleaded. Well, we're gonna have to find it, he said. Let's go back. But then he suddenly noticed Zemal was missing. Fuck! His shoulders dropped. I'm through with this shit. For a moment, it seemed as if the boy was going to strike out on his own, before Zemal appeared from behind the same tree that Glow had indicated. She's right, said the tall girl. Trick was confused. What? The path, replied the goth babe, sounding more than a little spooked, and the fork by the pile of stones, it's all there. Now it was the boy's turn to be fazed. But we haven't been there yet. You sure? He asked. Zemal nodded. Suddenly, the two of them regarded Glow with trepidation, though in Trick's case, the feeling of uncertainty turned swiftly to excitement. Fucking A, he beamed. Glow's gone carry on us. Come on, Glow. How'd you do it? Somehow, she was even less sure of herself now that her friends seemed to believe in her, a belief which, in her confused state, she couldn't share. Nor could she handle the Uzi-style grilling Trick was giving her. Have you been here before? As a kid, maybe? Or, I know. Were you adopted? Or were you born near here? Maybe you recovered a lost memory. What about your folks? Did you see this place in a dream? Come on, Glow, open up. The questions kept coming, forming a whirlwind in her mind. She could vaguely hear herself say no to everything Trick asked her, and was relieved when Zemal inadvertently came to the rescue. Hello! Zemal waved a hand in Trick's line of sight. I found the path, remember? But the boy only had eyes for Glow. Can you get us there? He said. Camp Crystal Lake? Glow nodded mutely. Yes. But how? Pressed Trick. What's going on? I don't know, murmured Glow. It's just that, well, there's this voice. Oh, interrupted Zemal ruefully, before singing a bad rendition of the Twilight Zone riff. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. I can hear someone, Glow continued absently. A woman. Calling me. She started to walk away again. Trick was about to follow, but Zemal pulled him aside. Don't go, she said. She's a mentalist. But Trick had made up his mind. You told me yourself she got it right. Only because she forgot to take her medication, sniped Z-Mall. Hey, look, maybe she's playing a joke on us. I don't know. But I've always gone with the Glowster. Well, maybe you should just go with the Glowster next time you get an itch in your pants, huffed Z-Mall. It was she who then turned to line up beside Glow. Trick laughed and hurried after the two of them, shouting, "Flashlights on, Trickettes! And if you find a river, just follow the fucker." But Glow didn't need any river to help her find the way. She knew exactly where Camp Crystal Lake was, and she had no intention of going there. Someone was watching the teenagers as they blundered their way deeper into the woods. For over 20 years, the Watcher had lain dormant, relying on Jason to do all the hard work. In truth, taking out the trash should have been the Watcher's responsibility. But soon the two of them would be reunited. None of those other girls, the ones from before who'd gone out on the lake, had been suitable. They had dismissed her voice as a figment of their imagination, or half remembered it as part of a nightmare of someone jumping out of the water at them, or had been driven insane. But Gloria was different. Gloria was receptive, impressionable, and so very, very rare. The Watcher had been able to reach out to the girl over thousands of miles, calling to her, bringing her to this place for this very special occasion. The Watcher was speaking to the girl even now, making sure that she kept along the right track. The Watcher had waited a long time for this moment. "This way." Glow stopped and turned to look straight at where the Watcher was observing her. But the girl's flashlight revealed nothing, save for a few gently waving branches. There was no wind. Soon the Watcher's years of solitude would be over. When Bill Irwin drove past the traveling sideshow, he'd had no idea what an awful week they'd been having. Atlantic City, Trenton, Middleton, Edison, all the major towns of New Jersey had been complete blanks. And in Newark, they'd been busted for not having a license. If they'd had the money, they could have sent a patch to sweeten things with the local authorities. But as always, they were broke, and so they'd up sticks and scurried out of the city before the law got wise and came to collect. If it had been up to Dr. Geistman, a.k.a. George Arthur Whitney, they'd still be there now, digging in their pockets and scraping up a cap full of dimes. Fortunately, his daughter had more sense than that. Alice Jane Whitney had told her people to get the trucks loaded, and then they'd sneaked out of town, giving Interstate 80 a miss and taking all the godforsaken back routes. Basically, it was business as usual for the sideshow, and Alice was sick of it. All her life she'd ever known was bumming from town to town with no money, no education, and no prospects. Her itinerant lifestyle had even stopped her having a regular boyfriend. She just mooched around with her father, grinding through the states with a truck full of wax effigies, put on display by 5 dummies of the human variety. And every leap year they'd managed to sell a few tickets. Yet here she was, the dutiful daughter sat behind the wheel of the motorhome at the head of the convoy. Still driving, still cussing, still determined to take charge of the carnival, just like she'd been every day for the last 5 years. The only good thing about being on the road was that it gave Alice plenty of time to reflect, especially on out-of-the-way routes like the one they followed now. It was her father who'd suggested trying some of these smaller places up in the lake region. "There probably won't be so many people here with video games," he'd said. "People in rural areas, they'll respect our work. They'll understand traditional entertainment. They won't be young hoodlums or drug addicts like those wretched New Yorkers." All the years he'd lived in America, and George still sounded old and senile, but then he was 72. Alice, no surprise, didn't agree with her father, but they sure as heck wouldn't remain in Newark. Besides, Wessex County was probably a good place as any to lose money. Good a place as any to take your life and flush it down the john. The young woman was grinding her teeth again. Bad habits. She needed a drink. Dad didn't approve of her drinking, of course. In fact, he didn't approve of anything she did these days. But then maybe he needed to take a good long look at himself. It was okay for him just to fill time until his appointment with God, but what about the rest of the show people? What about Alice? Would she still be here 40 years from now, wheeling a dilapidated model of Frankenstein out on some garbage-strewn parking lot, putting up with threats and abuse from a bunch of unruly brats for the sake of a few lousy dollars? No, something had to change. She didn't want to hurt Dad, Sure, they fought all the time. In fact, they never stopped fighting. But she still had a spot for him. Love? She wouldn't go that far, but Mom had died when Alice was only very young, and George had raised the girl all by himself. At least when he could fit her in between Dr. Jekyll and Jack the Ripper. That's why Alice couldn't just push him aside and take over. Mom's death had left George a broken man. He'd retreated more and more into a world of spooky castles and eerie graveyards, almost as if the wax show was his cocoon from reality. Alice turned to look at the old man asleep in the passenger seat beside her. God, he was thin and immaculately attired, in his British flat cap and casual cotton clothes, with their needle-sharp creases. The gray-haired gent even wore a tie. She reached over and caressed the stubborn old mule's cheek. How was she going to tell him that unless business picked up after the very next show, she was going to take charge? How could she tell him she'd already discussed it with the others? It would break his heart. Just then George began to rouse from his slumber. "Where are we?" he yawned. "Nearly there," said Alice. It was dark outside. George looked at the clock. It was after 9. "Where are we stopping?" he asked, his short tongue splicing the sibilance of an enunciation that it was otherwise gentle and measured. "Dunno," she replied. "See what turns up." "Well, we need to restock with some—" I know, cut in Alice impatiently. "We need water." George brushed his trim white mustache with his fingers and briskly inspected his only child. The show had aged her. She was 33, and yet she looked 53. He was pleased she never wore cosmetics, but he would have preferred her to wash her hair more often. Brown and lank, it flopped about like a greasy horse's tail. He wasn't particularly fond of her arms either. Her muscles weren't particularly large, but he could see them, and they were made of granite. As for the tattoos, why did she have to have so goddamn many? She didn't cover herself to the extent that he could exhibit her. "Come see the tattooed lady." But there was still enough ink visible to make conversation with strangers difficult. About the only part of her appearance George did approve of was the long, sleeveless floral dress he'd handed down from Ellen, her mother. Alice had made a mess of the hem, but she told him it made the dress more fashionable, like the brown engineer's boots she clomped about in. "That's odd." Alice was staring at something revealed in the headlamps. "What is?" her father asked. "That road sign coming up." George squinted. At his age, it was a miracle he didn't need glasses. "Crystal Lake, 2 miles. What's so unusual about that?" Alice frowned. "Well, there's no Crystal Lake on the road map." The first thing that struck visitors to the Grissom home was that it stank like a septic tank full of dead rats. The house was 4 walls of landfill under a roof of shit. Everything inside the hovel was flea-bitten and buckled. The floor alone was a minefield of rusty tools, animal remains, a gramophone with an axe buried in it, scraps of half-eaten food, an old sneaker with a dead mouse tucked in the toe, some girly books with jizz on them, and 24 pints of homebrew in bottles scattered around the room, so that no matter where you stood, all you had to do was hold out your hand, and some hooch would be there. You could even take a swig while pissing in the massive fireplace. One corner of the room was taken up by a cast-iron range, where all the food preparation was done, and opposite was where the family did the relaxing, in 4 easy chairs arranged in a semicircle around the hearth. The main room was dominated by the family table, an oak slab big enough to give most senior vice presidents boardroom envy. When you came in through the front door, the family table was the first thing you saw, and the Grissoms always kept it clean. Right now, the interior was lit by a single kerosene lamp. It hung from a bent nail that had been hammered into a beam running the length of the low ceiling. Scorched moths had glued themselves to the glass shield, turning the lamp into a magic lantern of suicide. The tiny flame didn't do much to lighten the gloom, and nothing to break the total silence that Ma and Pa so much enjoyed. Mr. and Mrs. Grissom were like 2 cadavers, dressed in 19th century formal wear, reclining in their bug-infested seats with every semblance of waiting in a chapel for cremation. They didn't talk, they didn't move. They just sat there, wasting every precious remaining second of their lives. They couldn't even remember the names they were born with. Suddenly the door was flung open. The cabin was dragged back to the land of the living by the sounds of Francis and Enoch, returning from the day's forage. The boys were trying to haul something inside, but they were struggling, their steps as heavy and uneven as a plastic hoedown. "Watch his head!" shouted Francis, followed by a loud thump as Enoch bashed Jason's skull into the doorframe. "Now look what you made me do!" moaned Enoch, shifting the blame. Lifting Jason out of the pit and carrying him all the way back had been exhausting. It was Enoch, the strongest of the brothers, who'd had to do most of the work. Francis, by comparison, seemed to have sunk all his effort into aggravating Enoch's tinnitus, and if Enoch wasn't so whacked, he'd have killed his idle brother there and then. A strange gurgling sound came from the far corner of the room. It was Ma trying to get her throat to work. What you got?" she drawled through her desert-dry lips. "We gotten us a fucking meat, Ma," answered Francis, grinning like a fool. "Now don't you go and take all the credit, Francis," warned Enoch. Ma tried to get up out of her seat, but fell straight back on her ass. Gray linen really suited the decrepit old bitch. "Now you hold on, Ma," called Francis. "I'll come getting you as soon as me and Man-Tits are done. I got a real surprise for you and Pa." The old man still hadn't moved a muscle. Enoch's muscles, on the other hand, were screaming with pain. "Quit flapping and help me get 4 trees up in the board," he groaned. "Don't you go disrespecting the family table," Francis said. "Yeah, don't you go disrespecting the family table," croaked Ma with what, for her, passed for an animation. "Shutting the fuck up, Ma." Enoch was in no mood for her griping. He gave his younger brother the nod, and they hoisted the body of Jason onto the tabletop. The limbs of the hockey mask killer were no longer stiff, so when he hit the wood, he lay perfectly flat on his back. He was utterly lifeless. "Look at what we got, Ma!" yelled Francis, having enough energy left to break into a jig. Enoch just leaned forward, gripped the edge of the table, and tried to get his breath back. His clothes were soaked, especially round the pits. "We gotten us a whole lot of meat," snickered Francis. "We got Jason 4 trees." "Who?" scraped Ma. "Jason 4 trees. You know." Francis was upset. He couldn't tell if Ma was deaf, senile, or just being a dumb old whore. "Who?" repeated Ma. Francis punched the wall. "Hell, Ma, we got Jason fucking 4 trees. A whole lot of fucking meat." "Meat?" asked Ma, her voice like cancer. "Meat!" bawled Francis. He ran outside to pick up the 2 sacks he and his brother had managed to drag along while struggling with Jason. "Meat! Meat! Fucking meat!" Francis was ranting now. He jumped up on the table, stood astride Jason, and emptied the 2 bags of dead critters all over the killer's massive body. "Get off the family table, okay?" squawked Ma. Enoch started to laugh. Even Pa was beginning to stir. All the shouting was reminding him just why he hated his family so damn much. "Meat!" bellowed Francis. Then he pulled out his bony knife and knelt down over Jason. "Disrespecting the family table," said Ma yet again. "Tell him, Pa." But her dandruff-encrusted skeleton of a husband was too busy wishing her dead to do anything else. As for Enoch, he just couldn't stop giggling. His brother was acting like a girl. Francis slapped a furry bastard chipmunk off of Jason's chest, then stabbed the big freak right below the collarbone. But the notched blade went in so deep that the knife became stuck. Enoch laughed even louder as Francis, snarling and gnashing, tugged the knife loose, and then started sawing until he succeeded in cutting out a cube of festering black Voorhees flesh. "Meat!" Francis held the wet morsel out so that those 3 ungrateful shits could see it, and then he popped the dripping tit steak plumb into his mouth. Okay, this has been Chapter 2 of Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs. And these Grissoms, boy, I tell you what, I don't know what to think of this family. Reminds me of the Leatherface family from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comment section what you thought of tonight's chapter. I'll be back very soon with some more of Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, and we got meat, Mawing Jason Four Trees!